Good morning, class, and welcome to another lecture by Professor Choi. So today we're going to be giving you a brief overview of the U.S. economy and the size of the U.S. economy, how do we measure that kind of stuff. So every economy has these basic questions that they need to answer. Questions such as, what are we going to be producing? How are we going to be producing it? And for whom are we going to be producing it? The U.S. economy works mostly on a market system. What that basically means is that the interaction between market participants answer the majority of those questions. Now, there is no such a thing as a 100% market economy today, because a 100% market economy would require no government intervention at all. And the U.S. government is very much integrated into the entire system. As a matter of fact, if you look at the expenditures, or if you look at the size of gross domestic product, or GDP, the U.S. government, it's around 20 to 25% of U.S. GDP. On the other hand, the majority of the answers to market questions in the U.S. economy are given by the interaction between the market participants, aka consumers and producers. So in a very basic way, because we live mostly in a market system, we produce whatever the consumer demands, the most efficient way possible so that the companies can make a profit, and we sell it to whoever wants to pay for it. Now, this is a bit oversimplified, but in general, a market economy is a demand-driven economy. We produce whatever the demand wants. All right. Now, what exactly do we produce in the U.S.? Well, the answer is pretty much everything. But here are some facts for you to know. The U.S. is the largest producer of goods and services in the world. The U.S. is also the largest consumer of goods and services in the world. The U.S. is the second largest exporter in the world as of 2020. And we have the third largest labor force in the world. Now, in a very basic way, we produce whatever we feel we have a competitive advantage at, and we import whatever we feel other countries have a competitive advantage at. In other words, we produce whatever we feel is relatively low cost in the US that we can then export or sell within the US market, and we import whatever we don't feel is relatively inexpensive or cost-effective. The metric that is used today to figure out the size of an economy is called GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product. There is another video where I explain GDP, so if you're interested in learning more about how do we calculate that, who's in charge of it, etc., I have another video already on it. Now, in a very basic way, GDP is the addition of all final goods and services produced in a year within the U.S. borders. Now, when you're really looking at outcomes in your economy, the GDP number is a very nice number, but what you really want is you want increases in living standards over time. In other words, you want your population to be better over time, and the metric that we normally use to figure out whether there's been an increase in living standards in your population is what we call GDP per capita. Now, GDP per capita is basically when you take GDP and you divide it by the size of population. So it's a GDP adjusted for population in your country, so you can say that each individual citizen is doing better or not doing better. An increase in GDP per capita over time is an indication of an increase in living standards over time. So in other words, it tells you that that each citizen is getting better or has more wealth over time, or more income, you could say. The growth rate of GDP, therefore, becomes important, because as long as the growth rate of GDP outpaces the growth rate of population in the US, the living standard of each American will be increasing over time. Economic growth is basically when output increases over time, output being GDP, and we shift the production possibility frontier outwards. If you're interested in learning again about the production possibility frontier, I have another chapter where I explain what the production possibility frontier is. Over the last 30 years or so, the US economy has grown at around 3%, while population has grown at around 1%. Therefore, we have been experiencing increases in living standards, regular increases in living standards. All right, now let me offer you a link here so that we can study a little bit more about this, and I'll be trying to post these links on the description so you can have access to them afterwards. So here's a website that I like to use regularly. Now this particular website allows us to use different metrics and compare them over time. It also allows us to track individual countries. So we can follow, for example, the United States over time. All right, now this is kind of in many ways, if you ask me and somebody says, well, you know, like give me one number that would tell me that that a country is doing better over time, and the one that I always like is really not income, it's life expectancy. So basically, if your population lives longer, then you're doing a lot of things right, because not only do you need a certain amount of money to survive, you also need a relatively good level of healthcare, etc., accessibility to healthcare. So there's a lot of things that have to come together for you to have increases in life expectancy over time. All right, so if we go back in time to the 1800s, notice that life expectancy in the US was an average of 39.4. Now compare that to a country like China, for example, that had a life expectancy of 32, or compare it to a country like India that at the time had a life expectancy of 25.4. The US was pretty high, but it's still low compared to today's standards. And here's why. Let me click on play. As you can see, there wasn't much change in life expectancy through the 1800s. By the way, the size of the ball is because population has been changing. So the bigger the ball, the bigger the dot, then the larger the size of population. Notice that somewhere around the 1880s, a lot of these trends starts changing, and there has been increases in living standards and living life expectancy since then. Notice also, by the way, that in the last 3 to 4 years, that number has been either flattening or declining. So we peaked at around 78.9 in the year 2012, and it's basically being flat or even declining since then. Now, regardless, if you measure it over long periods of time, aka we started in the 1800s and we drop now and we stop now, notice that living life expectancy has been increasing. All right, let's take a look at another metric, which is GDP per capita. And in this particular website, they call it income. But if you read here on the side, it tells you exactly what number they've been using. So notice that it says per person GDP. So it's GDP per capita, inflation adjusted. All right. So if you go back in time to the 1800s, GDP per capita in the US used to be 1,980 per year. This is a per year metric. GDP per capita in China, 736 per year in the 1800s. All right, so let me click on play. So notice how it's been a sort of steady increase in income, again measured as the GDP per capita in the US since the 1800s. That's the Great Depression, by the way, right here. And this is where we are today at around 56,000 GDP per capita compared to where we started at 1,980 per year. All right, let's take a look at another link here. Now, this is a link to a Wikipedia article where they have ranked countries by GDP per capita. All right, so this is a list of countries by GDP per capita using nominal GDP. Now, GDP, again, GDP per capita is when you take your gross domestic product and you divide it by the size of your population. So the US is kind of at the top, on the top of the world when it comes to GDP per capita. And if you look at the list, we probably have the largest population also here on the top of GDP per capita. So this is GDP per capita estimates according to the International Monetary Fund. Now this one's using a slightly different number than the one that was on the other graph, but basically it's using GDP per capita in nominal terms. Notice again that this is a number that we estimate today is sort of income per American, but in reality is really what we produce, which is GDP divided by the size of the population. So the highest one, as you can see on this list, is Luxembourg. According to the World Bank in 2018, it was Monaco, Liechtenstein. According to the United Nations in 2017, it was Liechtenstein or Monaco. These are very small places, by the way. All right, and here's the entire list of countries by GDP per capita. This is where Russia is on GDP per capita. Again, this is similar to income. This is where a country like Ecuador is, for example. This is where a country like Venezuela is. This is where you see Haiti. All right, so again, this is countries by GDP per capita. All right, let's take a look at a rank of countries by GDP. So this is a list of countries ranked by nominal GDP. Okay, this right here is these are the largest economies in the world using nominal GDP. The US is the largest economy in the world as of the time where they did this, with $21.4 trillion in production, followed by China at $14.1 trillion in production, then Japan at around $5.2 trillion, then Germany, then India, then the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Brazil, Canada. All right, let's take a look at the numbers ranked over here. Obviously, by the way, this is not the full list. So this is the list of the largest economies in the world according to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the United Nations. So the US is the largest economy in the world with a production of around $21 trillion. The European Union, remember, is not really a country. It's a group of countries So this is if you were to add all those group of countries together. Then you got China at around 14 trillion, then Japan at around 5 trillion, then Germany at around 3.8. Then you got India at around 2.9, United Kingdom at around 2.7 trillion dollars in production, then France, Italy, Brazil. Now I wanted to point out Russia, for example. So this is the size of the production of Russia, and that's 1.6 trillion dollars compared to the size of the production in the United States. Okay, so the US GDP is extremely large compared to even the countries in the top 10 on this list, except for China, which is, I wouldn't say close, it's about half, but definitely it's the only one with like 2 digits in terms of trillions. Okay, now let's go down the list a little bit more. So this is where you find Argentina, for example. Now this number is in the billions now. Then you find countries like Ecuador and Ecuador at around 100 billion. Okay. So again, this is the size of GDPs in the world. Countries ranked by GDP size. All right. Now here's a link to the CIA World Factbook. The CIA World Factbook is a book published by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency in the US, and it gives you all this really cool information about a particular country. They have, pretty much every country in the world, by the way, and all the information that I guess they could publish here. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the countries, there's no better place to start than here. So if you look at the United States and click on it, it gives you a pretty good overview of what we produce in the US and how the economy works. It also tells you a little bit more about the Federal Reserve if you're interested in learning about them. All right. Now this is a GDP. This GDP number that they use in the CIA, it's different. Something called purchasing power parity. And let me click on it so you understand why it's different. So if you look at the GDP that the CIA World Factbook is using, also known as purchasing power parity, the US, who is no longer the largest economy in the world, is the second largest economy in the world. Now the difference here is that they're using something called purchasing power parity. So in this particular GDP, a dollar buys you a dollar everywhere you go. So in other words, a dollar buys you candy, because that's kind of like what a dollar buys you in the US. So $1 equals candy in all the countries in the world. So China, for example, on the nominal list, sorry, this is per capita. All right, so if you look at China on the nominal list, no, this is still per capita. Okay. Yeah. Still per capita. All right, well, this list will, no, this one has a 5. How old is this? Yeah. So if you can see here, China on the, the nominal list is at $14 trillion. If we compare it instead to the number that they have here for the CIA, the number that they have is $25 trillion. So why is it that nominal is at 14 and this one's at 25? And the reason for that is because the CIA is using something called purchasing power parity. Because everything in China is basically half half off, aka with $1 you buy 2 candy, then they decided to almost double the GDP number for China. So in the purchasing power parity metric, which is the one that you get at the CIA, China gets a higher GDP, which is adjusted for the fact that everything is cheaper in China. All right. So again, the metric on the CIA is a metric where a dollar buys you exactly the same amount of stuff, and it uses a sort of weight to either make the GDP go up if things are cheaper or go down if things are more expensive. And this will be the list using the CIA purchasing power parity metric. All right, now there's more cool stuff that we can look at using the website for the CIA. All right, so we'll stay here on the website for the CIA. This right here will give you a little bit of a composition of GDP. In other words, the places where GDP is located. So if you look at household consumption, it's about 68% of our GDP. Government consumption is about 17% of our GDP. Investments about 17% of GDP. Exports is about 12.1, and imports it's about 15%. Sector composition, about 80% of our GDP is on services, about 19% is on industry. These are some of the agricultural products that we produce. We have a highly diversified, technologically advanced industry. So here's some of the things that we produce in general. This is the size of the US labor force, about 160 million people, number 3 in the world. So this is the size of the labor force. In rank by countries. All right, let's keep going with my links. All right, so here's a link to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The Bureau of Economic Analysis is the agency in the US of calculating gross domestic product, and this is the website. You can find them at bea.gov. Now this right here is the metric for GDP. This particular video was created on May 25th, 2020, and the US economy right now is in recession. That's what this number shows you. If you have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP, then that's basically an official recession. But right now, the US economy is already in recession, even though we haven't really measured the second quarter, because it's sort of ongoing. All right, this is the current account in the US. Basically, it's a metric of the stuff that comes in and stuff that goes out in our borders. This right here is a metric of personal income and income growth in the US in different metropolitan areas. And this is expenditures and consumption. So if you're interested in learning about that, visit the Bureau of Economic Analysis website. Another agency in charge of collecting all this cool information is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is their website, bls.gov. So this will give you a brief overview of the labor statistics in the US. So current unemployment rate in the US is 14.7. Let me show you a historical graph of that. So this is the unemployment rate in the US all the way back to 1948. They haven't even plotted the latest number here, by the way. But notice that right now it's at 14.7 due to the coronavirus recession that we're experiencing. And that number is basically the highest in history. In the 1980s, we made it to about 10.1, the 82, 83 recession. In the 2008, 2009, we made it to about 10%. And we haven't had a number this bad since 1940. So you have to go all the way back to the Great Depression to see a number this bad in unemployment. All right, again, notice it's basically just a sharp increase. All right, this gives you other metrics of the U.S. economy. So this right here is the amount of people that were hired or fired during a particular month. Notice that between the month of March and the month of April, we lost a lot of jobs. This is 20 million Americans. That's what that number is. That lost their jobs in a single month. Now, what makes the US so productive compared to other countries? Well, the technological advances and the fact that we embrace them very quickly. The US is an economy that's at the forefront of technological advances, and we have a highly skilled labor force that's always kind of like on the move and educating themselves. So we embrace technological advances, and we are willing to change the way we do things regularly. We have a very capital intensive production, which basically means that we use a lot of machines and factories to produce products. Therefore, that capital intensive production increases the productivity per worker. So we have a fairly high productivity per worker. Other societies are more labor intensive, and labor intensive production is less productive usually. The US also has easy labor mobility. People in the US are highly mobile, and they don't mind switching from a county to another, or from a city to another, or even from a state to another when they need to find a job that they are looking for. So our labor force is highly mobile, and that helps the economy be flexible. We also take advantage of lower opportunity costs in other nations. So we import products that can be cheaply made somewhere else, and that makes our entire production line also more flexible and cheaper in general. If you're interested on learning a little bit more, by the way, about what we produce in the US, most of my students are unaware of how much stuff we really produce here. So I want you to kind of start with your car, okay? So do you own a car? Are you sure you know where your car was made? Now, to double check, I want you to go outside and see if you can find where your car was made. There's usually a sticker on the driver's side door of the car, right on the frame. So it will be like right there, stuck to the frame, and it will tell you where the car was made. Normally it tells you at least the state where it was made, or the country where it was made. If you cannot find it there, the VIN number on the car usually tells you where the car was made, because there's a letter or a number associated with the production facility. Now here's a link to an article on Wikipedia where you find all the automobiles that are produced inside the United States and the manufacturer that makes it. So in case you didn't know, the US is the largest producer of cars in the world. And the majority of the cars that you and I drive are made in the US. All right, that concludes another presentation by Professor Choi. I hope you learn about the US economy today, and I hope you're interested in learning a little bit more. Have a good one.